who's from New West Public Affairs, but in a previous life has been many things, including the former mayor of the city of Edmonton, a federal Liberal cabinet minister, and last but not least, a bus driver with the city of Edmonton. So please, round of applause for our panelists this morning. So let's start. I want to start with every panelist, and again, to build trust with the audience, say again who you are and why, what you bring to this conversation and your thoughts around this trust deficit. And I'll start with Kofi.
All right. So hey everyone, my name is Kofi Hope, and as mentioned, I run a firm called Monumental with my business partner Zara Ibrahim, who is also part of today's proceedings. And I also have roles at the University of Toronto at the School of Cities and the Monk School for Global Affairs. So around the question of trust and why it's important, maybe the first thing I would just share that really is the reason I've spent a lot of time thinking about trust is the connection between low trust in institutions and populism. And the specific area that I took a deep dive on that with some research that we did through the School of Cities was around the populist rise of a man many people probably know, Mr. Rob Ford, the former mayor of Toronto, right? And I think in many ways he wrote that like populist playbook, certainly for Ontario, because his brother has taken it and now won 3 consecutive majorities, which is unheard of in our province since the 50s, but also he was quite successful with that in his own time and is still loved by many, also notorious to many as well, in our city. And when I came back, I was really interested in what had gone on. I'd been over in the UK, came back, and I was working in a community, the Jane Finch community in northwest Toronto, which was part of a belt of kind of what we call the inner suburbs, the parts of the city built after the Second World War, where you had the quote-unquote Ford Nation. And so every day was with people who loved Rob Ford and would talk about it. And then I also very much part of the progressive movement in Toronto, live more in the downtown part of the city, and would hear people who were just flabbergasted that this man was the leader and were embarrassed by the scandals, and we know about the crack smoking and all that sort of stuff that was happening there. And so I thought, let's take a deep dive, because many of these progressive voices I found just really didn't get where the support was coming from. And they pathologized folks in the inner suburbs. Said, oh, they're just naturally socially conservative, or they just love cars and that lifestyle, or just this idea they hold values fundamentally different from us, and that's why they're voting in a way we don't understand. And so we took a deep dive, and we found at the essence of it, you know, a lot of that support was not coming from ideology or values or politics, but was derived from low trust. And when you do studies, I did it in mine and other ones, you'd see the lowest level of trust in the city of Toronto for any institution was city council and city councillors. And that mapped directly to folks' income levels. The lower income you were, the less trust you had in city council. And if you put that on a map, if you looked at low trust, if you looked at where low income people lived, and you looked at who voted for Rob Ford, it was almost in perfect alignment. And so it was kind of obvious, if you really wanted to look at it, what was driving this populism. And 2 things quickly I'll say that came up about what drove that low trust. Inequality and issues with quality of services, right? We live in a city, in the city of Toronto. 1970s, it was a city of neighborhoods that were middle class, equally distributed. Over a generation, it really polarized into a city of haves and have-nots. And when you talk to folks about this, they didn't speak about income inequality or class divides. They put it in the language of quality of services. When you ask them, how do you know if the city council cares about you, if city government cares? And they said, I'll tell you how I know. If that fence near my kid's playground is broken and gets fixed, if that dead raccoon that's been in the road for 5 days actually gets picked up, if the washrooms, public washrooms are working, if the bus comes on time, if someone deals with the mice that are in my community center. And they said, and we know in certain parts of the city, this stuff gets fixed. When we go in the leafy, privileged neighborhoods, the roads look nice and clean. The infrastructure looks great. And we don't see that here. And that tells us that City Hall doesn't care about our communities, doesn't care about our priorities. And that was really the heart of the whole Rob Ford phenomenon, is he saw that wedge, he came in there, and populism, its oxygen is low trust in institutions, because it says elites have captured the state, they don't care about you. take me as your champion, I'll go in there, and if you don't trust the state to build, at least give me a license to destroy. And so I think for all of us who care about politics and trying to avoid the chaos that populism brings and the democratic backsliding, we have to really think about trust in institutions. Because progressives would say, oh, we have a climate strategy and a resilience strategy, and we've got, this brilliant vision for transit. And people say, yeah, but you can't fill in the potholes. How are we going to trust you to do that? We'd rather go with the guy who gives us his cell phone and we can call them. And my neighbor got something fixed when they called them. And so at the heart of really having a healthy democracy, I think, is getting down to that trust deficit and building trust at the day-to-day level in folks.
Interesting. Actions over words, for sure. Jessica, where do you come from to the trust deficit when it comes to journalism?
So I've been a journalist for a really long time. I've worked for big corporate media and tiny independent two-person operations and everything in between. Media is one of those institutions that people study formally in terms of its trust, like banks and government. And as you probably know, trust in media is on the decline. It's declining worldwide. It's declining faster in English markets than in many other markets. And there's three main reasons for that. The first one is the rise of misinformation and disinformation. The more fake news or poor quality news there is in the media environment, the less people trust all the content that they find. It's just like if I see one piece of bad or poorly reported news, the next three or four I'm sort of prejudiced against inherently. But one of the interesting things that I found while I was leading this research project called What Should the CBC Be? Is that trust in Canada is really reliant on two factors. One is there a journalist in your community, a person you can go to if you suspect that there is, for instance, corruption on city council or something like that? Is there a journalist who's showing up at your kid's soccer game or the local team reporting on what's going on? And that's kind of it. The other thing is, how much do we spend on media? Canada spends less on public media than almost all major countries that you would think of us as being in conversation with. We're usually number 17 or 18 out of the 20 major countries that go to the G7 and other global summits. So it's sort of two interesting factors. And I guess before I move on to what we found, and I'll let others speak, it's that about 39% of Canadians right now trust their media environment. That number has fallen by 20 points since 2018. We used to be one of the countries that trusted the most in journalism of anywhere in the world, more than the United States, definitely more than almost everywhere in the global south. So we've gone from being one of the most trusted markets where this was not really even questioned to being a country where it's a real issue. It's a real issue.
Amarjeet.
Yeah, hi everyone. Are there any other recovering politicians in this room?
Put up your hand. Raise your hand. Any? Do we have any?
Oh, okay.
We have
That's one. That's one.
Okay,
All right.
wow.
Okay. Oh, here, a couple of them. Yes. I'm in good company, at least for one. I hope there are many aspiring politicians in this room. I really, really hope that. From my perspective, trust is stored and built when institutions work for the common person, for an average person. I may sound very over-optimistic, but from my perspective, I have seen this country work for an average person. I came here as a working class immigrant with very little to my name, but institutions responded to my needs. When I needed to take English as a second language classes, public school responded to that. When I needed to learn a new language, I went to a library. That library responded to my needs. When I needed to figure out my place, belonging in this place, recreational facilities, community leagues, and many other cultural organizations stepped up to provide me that belonging. So this country works. This country really, really works well when public institutions focus on the people. And in the worst moment in my life, this country also stepped up again. Some of you know my history. I have been a social activist throughout my life, union organizer in my life. I ran for city council, served on city council for 8 years, and a member of parliament, minister, and just concluded my mayoral term. But in between, before I got into that politics, because of my activism, I actually moved back to India to work on land reforms, and I was arrested, and I spent 21 months in prison, 18 months in solitary confinement. As a Canadian, as a permanent resident of Canada, this country brought me back. This country brought me back. So that's where my optimism comes from, is my lived experience in this place. Canada is not a perfect country, but it's a pretty damn good country, right? And I think that's the perspective I think we need to understand. Yes, there has been changes. Yes, there are challenges, but I think we have the capacity to overcome those challenges, and I want to share more about that.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I'll open this up to Kofi, and then we can hear from the rest of the folks. But do you see, and try to frame this mistrust. Is this something we've never seen before? Is it tied to COVID? We've heard from earlier panels that there's something different happening here. But do you see distrust today as primarily a communications problem, a governance problem, or something deeper? Kofi, you were talking a bit about that, but what's happening here? Why? Do we see such different level, like very low levels of support amongst all of these different areas?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the pandemic really impacted our politics and how people thought about the state and the lockdown and the different pieces. But I think there's a couple factors that we could talk about that are driving it. And to maybe pull on my earlier remarks, when you think about service delivery, the reality is life is getting really hard for folks. Costs have gone up. You know, I live in a city where it's ridiculously unaffordable to have housing, to acquire housing, and folks are leaving en masse to other cities because they just don't see a life for themselves in the city of Toronto if they haven't been lucky enough to buy already or inherit a home. And so people are feeling these pressures, and they're really looking to the state to give that, you know, as Amarjeet spoke about, to give that support to them. And I don't think it's always for a lack of trying, but I think sometimes we ignore the individual citizens' experience with these systems. There's a great article I remember reading like 15 years ago, and it was talking about Tony Blair and New Labour. And they had kind of lost, and they were kind of in the aftermath looking at, but we don't get how we lost the support of folks. We put in all of these new programs, all of these investments. And the author was saying, yeah, but the missing piece was the navigation of services, was the access to them. And they described someone who was a senior, and they said, you know, New Labour put in like 12 new policies to benefit folks who are 65 plus, but it became incredibly difficult to figure out how to access them, in what place do I qualify, filling in the paperwork. And so even when we invest in services, if we don't think about that place where the rubber hits the road, making it easy to navigate, making it accessible to people, making it clear what's out there, then people continue to feel like I'm struggling, I'm putting my head down, I'm just pushing through life, and where is government to help me? And I've worked with civil servants who are like, but we're investing here, we're doing that. And so there is a gap in knowledge and a gap in accessibility that then leads to a lack of trust with folks, especially when they hear, oh, they said they spent all this money, but I've never seen it. And so how we break down that communications distance between individuals and institutions is a big part of people feeling, oh, this is showing up for me in my life, and that's rebuilding that trust that has been lost, and especially for communities where it was really harmed by the impact of the pandemic, of lockdowns, of those policies, and they put a lot of that blame on the state.
Jessica, your thoughts on that? Is it communications, governance, something deeper happening here? What's at the root of this?
With media, it's complicated because most of us tend to approach journalism or, even entertainment in media as if it's something we should just get because we need it, like, electricity or running water or roads. Like, we should have access to high quality information. But media is a business. Like, every individual media outlet is trying to if not make a profit, then at least pay its costs and pay the salaries of the people that work for it. So it's not really this virtuous thing. I wish, we all thought that it was, but it's always been in the business of making money. And the media environment has been so disrupted by the rapid changes in technology that have happened, I'm going to say, starting in 2012, 2014, but really blowing up in 2016. That's when you had the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And so what's happened in our society is that big tech platforms, Meta and Google are usually named first, but there's a whole bunch of them. It's Netflix, it's Amazon, it's every company that we all use to stream stuff from, have quickly taken up all the revenue that used to be earned through advertising for many small businesses and many communities and many big ones. Anyway, you're a journalist, you know this, so we don't need to go back over that. But what happened was, as the media started to die, it stopped having a reliable presence in many Canadian communities. And I don't just mean rural communities, I mean the middle of downtown Toronto. More than half of Canadians aren't satisfied by the quality of their local news options. Even people in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal, and it's higher, it's up to 60%, anywhere that's outside, basically, of a big suburb. So people are really feeling the lack of that connection to each other and to the media, and therefore their trust is eroded.
Amarjeet.
I think there are numerous reasons, but I want to focus on two. One is, it is tough out there for a lot of people. Cost of living is really impacting people. Housing affordability is impacting people, grocery bills. And when people see that the governments, that institutions are not focused on them, making their living easier, people start losing trust in institutions. And we have seen that happen over the number of years as those crises become more and more acute for people. And that is impacting mostly the low-income families, people who haven't had the opportunity to go to a university or college, have a higher education, and then they're really struggling. I think that's one. The second, I would say, living through COVID, those people who already were feeling disaffected were severely impacted by COVID because they were living in isolation, they didn't have the support system. And the decline of the credible evidence-based media and the source of information for those people became social media. And that social media during that time was filled with a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of misinformation that appealed to people's lack of, in a way that they were not feeling part of the society. And they were more prone to those kind of misinformation and disinformation. I think that is really affecting today as well. I think that distrust in institutions has grown because of people's lived experience of a hardship, but also how they felt connected to each other through that the social media.
Can I just hot pursuit on that? Building on that. I mean, do folks remember during the pandemic when we talked about frontline worker heroes and equitable recovery and build back better? And it came from recognition that some folks got to work from home and some folks didn't have that option. They were on the front lines, they were being exposed to the virus. I know the data from Toronto, it was those working class, primarily racialized communities where disproportionately the most folks died from COVID, where most folks took the hit to their incomes. And there was, for a moment, where we said, okay, we've got you. We see that whether you're doing nursing or long-term care facilities, you're putting yourself at risk for society. When this is over, we're going to make sure we focus on you. And I think that promise was broken. I think it sounded good at the time, and we all fell into our individualized bubbles as this thing dragged on. And afterwards, that social contract to say you are on the front lines for us, we'll be there for you, didn't happen. And people just found prices going up and life getting harder. And I think that was incredibly damaging as well to trust, that people said, okay, it's everyone for ourselves, and all of those lucky folks who get to work from home and get to see their investments going up and get to, continue to enjoy the best part of the Canadian dream, they're just maximizing that, and you get that, K-shaped economy they talk about. For us, it's just worse and worse. And I think that really took a lot of the wind out of the sail for folks about that hope that the Canadian dream was there, or that, you know, government and society had their backs.
Was responding. So what's the path back? What's a path to trust? You all come from very different avenues to talk about this, and I want to talk in very practical terms about things you'd like to see happen, or ways that our institutions could respond to our communities when you diagnose the challenge like this. So I'll start with Kofi, and then we'll keep going in the order. So the path back, what do you want to see in some of the work that, maybe talk about some of the work you're doing in Toronto right now?
Yeah, and I think the importance, like, government is large, it's complicated, society has so many things happening, and again, for the record, not personally a Rob Ford fan, but I think it was very important to understand what he did. And this thing, and our premier has taken it up as well, this idea, I'll give out my cell phone number and you just call me when there's an issue. It's totally impractical at scale as a way to deal with people's issues, but people love the concept, because when government seems so obtuse and it seems there's so many places you have to go, to have a direct human interaction feels great for folks. Even though I know, like, in those cases, he would get the calls and then have his staff call 311, right, which is a service in Toronto you can call and they'll give you municipal support, as opposed to telling people to call 311. But I think the lesson from there and from our research is people are really desiring strong human connections and positive experiences when they go to look to government or institutions, and that's where you start building it back. And so thinking about the user experience, thinking about, you know, Rob Ford talked about customer service, improve it at the city. And many professors were like, what's he talking about? This isn't Costco. It's not about customer service. But he was speaking to something that when people go and have a complaint, when you go to your community center and you line up early in the morning and then find out you can't get swimming lessons, when you have these experiences, it just, you know, erodes that trust. And so I think a real focus in creating human avenues where people can get support, where they can be heard, and giving people positive interactions. And when we do our engagement work in the city of Toronto, and when people are talking to institutions or leaders, we don't do the town hall format, somebody on stage, PowerPoint, people hear it, then they respond, loud voice dominates. We really try to do tactics that bring leaders and representatives into the room, sitting around tables with folks as human beings, sharing ideas, and people coming away and saying, oh, now I've humanized or personalized this institution, and there's some great folks there. And I've actually met someone who I think I can reach out to next time when I have an issue. Doesn't have to be the leader, doesn't have to be the counselor. That's not practical. But having human relationships and bonds between citizenry and institutions starts making people feel bought in, starts making people feel like, oh yeah, this is something that is not faceless, but it's actually responsive to me and my needs.
Jessica.
Yeah, I could talk for an hour about this, but I won't. But so 2 things that we found when we studied public media and we compared Canada's CBC to 17 other jurisdictions worldwide was that the countries that have the highest trust in media and public media almost all have some form of media literacy program. So, for instance, in Iceland, which has some of the highest trust in the world in media, journalists will go into classrooms and explain how they do their jobs, the same way that a firefighter might go in and explain how they do their job. And I actually think that's really important. I think we leave a lot of this work on the table in Canada because we don't want to brag about ourselves, or we don't want to tell people how to think or something like that. So there's this real fear about breaking down that line between professional journalists and the public. And I think it's killing us. It's really costing us trust and credibility. No one knows what goes on inside a CBC news meeting. And I've been a journalist all my life, and I know there's reasons why you don't want to tell the public, well, we published this and we didn't publish that. But I think it's time to just say, this is what we do and why we do it the way we do it. And give us your feedback. The CBC in particular is regulated by something called the CRTC that most Canadians have never heard of. It does have regulatory hearings every 5 years, but I've never been invited to one, and chances are you haven't either. So there's other countries like Germany has citizen councils where different regions have citizens who participate in committees that tell the public media service what they need from it. Anyway, that's just 2 ideas. And also, we should spend more.
Of course.
Amarjeet.
I will highlight 2 points. One is building up from the previous session. we need to make sure that we are restoring trust in bodies that are independent of politics, whether it's election commissioners, whether it's ethics commissioner, whether it's the judicial system. It has become, those institutions have become a target. And that's the most harmful thing you can do to democracy and trust in democracy, when people feel that it's okay to attack and question the credibility of institutions that uphold those values. I think that's a really call to action from the last panel, that how do we as a community, as a society, make sure that those who do question those institutions, we push back, right? We hold them accountable for them. The second one is that we need to humanize dissent. It is okay to disagree with each other. It is okay to have tough, passionate conversations about where we are, where we need to be. But that respect for each other, we need to hold that respect for each other. We need to have the capacity to have tough conversations with each other. I think we're losing that capacity. We are seeing that in our elected bodies, where we are losing that patience. We want to get through things very, very fast. We want to, get things going. Yes, important, very, very important. But we also need to respect the process to get to those decisions. That means having those very difficult, uncomfortable conversations that make our society actually a better place, and make sure that the end result is also better.
A follow-up to that, Amarjeet, is what is advice on how to foster dialogue like that? And I'd like to hear from all of you on that, because I think that's at the root of this. A lot of folks are not having these difficult conversations, and people are going into their corners, and they're becoming more rooted in these spaces, and there's the mistrust. So how do you do it? What's some tips?
I'll add to that. I think as a politician, I have seen how polarization had made it very hard for elected officials as well. But I would also say polarization has actually made somewhat easier for people to get elected, because then you can just cater to your base. And if your base is large enough, you can actually ignore your opposition to the level that you don't need them anymore. I think that polarization is actually hurting us in a different way, that is making some people lazy to do the hard work of engaging with those who disagree with you. I think that's where we need to think differently. That we need to have deliberate conversation with those people who disagree with us.
Jessica?
I think I agree with what each of you are saying, which is people need to have a face-to-face relationship with a journalist. And the media's been dying since the day I started working. I sort of started right at the beginning of the digital age, and it's just been dying. But so do more with less has been the mantra we've had for so long. At risk of making a gross generalization, in the late 90s, there was a belief that the media and all the arts should support themselves financially, and government started to cut. So the Paul Martin government cut 30% of the CBC's budget in the late 90s, and it never really came back. The way the CBC responded to that is the same way that all Canadian media has responded to cuts, which is that it starts cutting from the communities. And it puts its money into the national programs that will theoretically serve everyone. But then what happens is we have whole communities in this province, for instance, that just don't have the media that they need. So anyway, I think we're right now at the beginning of what I hope and see being a sea change, which is that the future for all of this stuff is local and regional. It's like all the energy needs to go there. And you saw the Carney government give the CBC an extra $150 million specifically to open new bureaus. And I think they did 12 the first year, and maybe another wave exactly the same. I'm supposed to be able to visit one of them soon, and I'm really excited because I want to see what's the impact in a community in northern BC to get media that hasn't had it ever.
Kofi.
Yeah, I think, as the constant theme, the human connection is so important. When you were speaking, reminded me, had a good friend, Danny, who is a journalist at the CBC. He's now in New York Times. I remember one time we did a very Toronto thing. We went up to Eglinton West to buy some jerk chicken straight from the drum. And we're talking to the guy who's there at Wraps, and he's cutting the chicken and says, look, what do you guys do? And Danny's like, oh, I'm a journalist. And he's like, you're the one lying to us. And it was a really, kind of awkward moment. But afterwards, and I, debriefed with Danny afterwards, but dissecting it, it was like, yeah, he may have had very few interactions in his life, if any, with people who were professional journalists. And I think we can live such atomized and individualized lives in society and then these algorithms that it's really about how do we create spaces to connect in person. And my co-founder, Zara Ibrahim, she talks a lot about this, about social infrastructure at the neighborhood level and places where we can meet, across differences and just have conversations, have positive interactions. And that's the kind of foundation that we build democratic culture from. And so for me, part of that is to do it, we have to invest in social infrastructure and spaces where people can come together for free, not just, in the mall kind of food court, but places like libraries, places like, community centers, public schools, where we can meet across these different class, racial, background divides and just have, even if it's a 5-minute conversation with someone, that's what helps humanize society and is that building block for democracy. I got that. I think the best place for socialization in Canadian culture, for me, was public school, because I grew up, much of my life in Mississauga, and you met people from everywhere, and through a strong public institution, we learned about each other. Then everyone kind of grew up and went into their separate paths, and it's these public institutions that can help bring us back together and to learn about each other, see each other, and build empathy.
Can I piggyback on that? Yeah, so one of the things that I found studying public media, like I went into a project about the CBC with a lot of preconceptions and misconceptions. One of them was, do we still need to do like entertainment and cultural programming? Maybe we should just do news because misinformation is important. And like a majority of Canadians really want to learn about other Canadians and other communities across the country. We're dying for it. We want to know like what is happening in Atlantic Canada. I'm here right now. And I think investing in understanding other people's point of view is absolutely the way forward out of this situation and all of these institutions.
We've talked a lot about, we're going to go to questions in a second, but I want, maybe one of you can take this question, but we've talked a lot about in-person, but what about online? I mean, there's so much mistrust, and it's a lot, that could be an hour conversation, but how can we rebuild that trust in some of these institutions from an online situation? And just, is it too much of a beast? And does that keep you up at night? Like that's something that, as a politician, that was probably where you were getting the most mistrust.
Yeah, it's very easy to say nasty things when you're not actually having a real conversation with the person, right? But I think if we start applying, like if I'm posting something on LinkedIn or Facebook, if I'm keeping in mind the people who are going to receive that information are also human beings. I think maybe having that lens applied to, I'm just thinking aloud, maybe that could be a better approach to social media, is thinking that you're actually having a conversation with someone who's a friend of yours or a neighbor of yours or a colleague of yours, in that sense.
Thanks. Okay, let's open it up to questions from the audience. Okay, I see a few hands, and I know there's a microphone. Is anybody? There it is, at the back. If you can say who you are, where you're from, and then address the question to one of our panelists.
Yeah, sure. My name is Robert, and I'm not only from Toronto, but I actually used to work for a Toronto City Councillor. So, Kofi, what you mentioned about, the politics in Toronto, I've seen that firsthand within the halls of Toronto City Hall. So I guess my question to you is, how do people inside municipal government, whether they're political staffers working for city councillors or the mayor, or even your ordinary city staffer working, regardless of their bureaucrats, all the way down to people cleaning up the parks or like running the community center, etc. Right? So how they can, build, or rather rebuild trust in that capacity within municipal government. Thank you.
So yeah, local government and rebuilding trust from the frontline staff, I guess, to all the way up to staff working in a counselor's office. Kofi.
Yeah, big question. Thank you for it. Maybe one thing I think about, and we work a lot from current position with civil servants, is sometimes, and I can't speak to every municipal government, I'll speak to Toronto, which I know quite well, it seems many times because of a kind of framework of managing risk and conformity to rules, because the consequence for not following the rules tends to be worse than bad outcomes, is people tend to default to no. Citizens come with ideas, they come with things they want to do, and there's a default to no. And I think there is a shift we have to do, which in part is empowering civil servants more to be able to take
Trans-Delta, how's everybody doing?
To, deviate what makes sense, to be able to say,
all right, I'm learning you. I'm here.
Let's have a conversation. Let's see what's possible, because that's the place when people feel like, oh, whenever I reach out to government, I can't do this. It's shot down. It's, every good community idea, we have to go through a million pieces to move forward. That really disillusions folks. And so part of it, though, is we have to empower those folks, whether they're frontline, whether they're counselor staff, or civil servants in general, to be able to make some unique decisions, to be able to problem solve with citizens, so you don't always have this feeling that I'm doing a ton of paperwork and then one mistake and I get a no. Or I bring a brilliant idea and we're told, oh, but this wasn't a council priority, so sorry, no. That really turns folks off, and I think we can move towards a culture that encourages folks to say yes and be much more co-creative and collaborative with citizens.
Which builds trust. We have a lot of questions in the room, so over here, I think there's a few over here. Sorry, I can't, it's hard to see because of these lights. So there's 3 questions over here. 3 or 4. And if you, again, say your name and your question.
Hi, my name is Ryan. And for the bridging the gap between citizens and the institutions of government, like you talked about Rob Ford and giving his phone number to his constituents, that's one thing when you're the counselor of Etobicoke or whatever it was. But when you're like a federal politician or a provincial politician, and you represent people in these much larger and more abstract institutions, how do you bridge the gap between individuals and having an actual human face to that massive bureaucracy?
Great question. Amarjeet has been in that position, so let's throw it over to Amarjeet.
Yeah, I would say prior to COVID, elected officials would hold, or bureaucrats would hold, a lot of public-facing, in-person consultation, meetings, town halls, and we have seen a significant decline in that after COVID. Because COVID, we discovered virtual
Zoom.
Zoom meetings, and then and it's easy to have a Zoom meeting. Maybe more people can attend it. Less costly to organize. But I would think that I think we need to go back to that prior to COVID type of engagement when it comes to building that trust between or connection between citizen and the decision makers.
Yeah. There's how much time do I have left? Sorry, maybe 5 minutes. There's a question up at the front here. I'm not sure where the microphone has gone there, or whomever has a question. Good questions. I think up at the front here, there's a, right there. Again, say your name and your question.
Thank you. Ben Liu from the University of Toronto. Hi, Kofi. I'm struggling with the idea of human connection and building trust through attention to this idea of customer service and how it sits in tension with the obligations of citizenship. How it causes people to think of their taxes as a commercial transaction, and that at the end of it, they have to have some sort of satisfaction. Otherwise, they don't feel seen, they don't feel served. How do we resolve the trust building and that gap without the unintended consequence of causing people to think that government must only serve their needs, and that if it serves the needs of others, that it's failing them?
Jessica or Kofi or Jessica?
I'll answer quickly. I think we've lost some sense of collective. That question that you're asking specifically, like many Canadians know that $33 a year per person on average goes to support the CBC, and a lot of people really resent that. We found that if you increase the quality of services, people are actually willing to pay more for it. And the countries where the citizens are happy to spend the most, they also have sort of like the highest quality services. So my answer isn't like, let's just tax everybody more, but I think we need to communicate more clearly what the value is of stuff to you. Also, like I found out in the course of doing our project that like I spend $288 a year on public parks, which I didn't through taxes, and like I don't play soccer on public parks, but I'm really happy for other people's kids to go and play soccer in public parks. That wouldn't even cross my mind. So I don't know where it became a tit for tat, but somehow there's a missing sense of all for one and one for all.
Maybe education, civic education, or just understanding exactly citizenship as beyond just this transaction, but what citizenship truly means. Any other questions? Because I know, and then I think we'll wrap it up. Okay, over at the front here. Sorry, you're getting a workout with the microphone this morning. Okay, they're fighting over here. Okay, one. I think this will be our last question. Is that? Or how much time do I have?
If I go really quickly,
yes,
can we
5
get
minutes,
Meredith
so maybe
to ask her? If I go really quickly, can you ask Meredith to her question too? So Farah Mohammed, I'm currently a senator from Ontario. So what I grapple with... Sorry,
what is your name?
Farah Mohammed. So what I grapple with is we live in a world where speed is the name of the game, but trust takes time.
Yes.
Any reflections?
Very powerful. Any reflections on that, what she just said?
Maybe I'll just say quickly, when I hear about that, I think about engagement, because engagement and consultation is something, we do every day at Monumental. And I think there's a difference between engaging for breadth and engaging for depth. And I think institutions have to be very careful when they're doing any engagement to think about the two, because the advantage of breadth is you take that time and you can build those relationships. Like we just finished some work with the Toronto Police Service around mental health and the impact on racialized communities and how to divert more cases of folks in mental health crisis from a policing response to a health response. Very tricky issue, very loaded. TPS has a mixed reputation in community. We said for this, it has to be depth. We're going to bring together a group of folks, and we're going to take a year for them to work, for us to meet multiple times, for them to learn from the institution, give their feedback from institutions, be heard. And we knew that wouldn't get the breadth if we just did an online town hall and got 400 people there who could talk about it. But we knew, to build trust, we need to take that time, and it was better to create a good experience and a positive experience for 15 people who could go back to their communities and talk about what they've learned about the institution and could point to the positive work they did, than simply trying to hit as many people as possible. So I think we have to balance that. We can't always have breadth, but you're totally right. Trust takes time, and sometimes we have to slow down, and sometimes we have to move at the speed of trust, which requires us to maybe not have the instant feedback, might not have the instant policy delivery, but long-term, it's rebuilding that kind of democratic foundation.
Go ahead, Amarjeet.
It takes time to build trust, but takes more time to restore that trust once that trust is broken. And we have seen that in my work. When I got elected to mayor, I made anti-racism and reconciliation two of my top priorities. But the trust of the communities was broken. And we need to have a lot of in-person, leader-to-leader conversations, spending a lot of time out in the community to rebuild that back. But it takes effort. It takes a lot of time, and you need to be very deliberate about it and understanding that it's going to take some time.
Jessica?
One last thing. Senator, I think we haven't really mentioned the changing geopolitical conditions around Canada, but the last year really presented a sense of urgency, and I saw that rise of, I guess you could call it nationalism, that came when Trump said he was going to invade or annex us or whatever, and everything else that's going on around it. really did show that when push comes to shove, Canadians will fight and stand together even if they don't believe the same things and live in the same places. So I like what an earlier panelist said about rebuilding a new narrative for Canada. And it might be time for us to all sit down and go back and do some of that for modern Canada, not as it was in the past.
Not in the past. Last question over here, and then we will wrap it up. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience. Last question.
Great, thank you. Meredith Preston-McGee with the Global Center for Pluralism. Kofi, I loved your expression about how you sort of build at the neighborhood level. My question back would be that we are not a collection of neighborhoods. We're also an entire country with huge geographies. So how do you take that neighborhood approach and connect the neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood across the entire country to build that trust?
Yeah, and I think you've kind of had part of the answer in the question, right? Is it's important to have gatherings like this where we're, thinking about the different level of community that people participate in. And so sometimes having national gatherings are critical, and having that representation, and again, that time that we invest. And so, many of us, I'm sure, have gone to conferences like this one. It's a great experience. You meet awesome people, and then that's the end of it. And again, it's those long-term pieces. So whether they're part of, multi-month programs where you meet multiple times, whether there's real intention, not just that initial meeting, but what's the follow-up, and that's where virtual can help, right? You have a kind of national gathering, a regional gathering, and then there's a platform created where you can continue to have dialogue and connection to folks. I think we have to do that weaving work, but it is about respecting the local level and finding ways that we can help folks with that, act globally or act locally, but think nationally, think globally. We provide those pathways for folks. And I think institutions like, the folks who've brought us here today, Democracy Exchange, are doing some of that weaving work from the local level to the national.
I think taking that from a local level to the national level is more important today than ever. We are facing possibly 2 referendums in Canada, one here in Alberta, one in Quebec. I think this is the time to have those conversations. I really want to thank you, those of who are not from Alberta, coming to visit and be part of this conference, because what are you going to learn here? You're going to see sometimes people's view of Alberta are not what Alberta actually is. Alberta is a very diverse province with very diverse political cultures, history, and such a strong presence of multicultural communities, strong presence of indigenous communities. Alberta, the treaty, as you heard from the elder this morning, treaties in this land predate the creation of this province. I think this is what the message I hope you will take to your communities when you go back, that this province is integral to what this country is. And I hope that you will take that message back to your communities.
A big thank you to our panelists. Big round of applause. Yes, I appreciate all of you and all the work that you're doing in the areas to not only build community, but rebuild trust in some of our institutions. So thank you. And again, thank you to our audience. We will be starting lunch soon. So have a great afternoon and see you in the next sessions.